and of course the key high-owned players that you're going to need to know about today. I'm Chris Spags, joined by one of the smartest men doing daily fantasy analysis in the NBA world, Fast Eddie Fear. How you doing, Eddie?
I'm doing very well. How are you today?
I'm good. I'm excited. This is a fun slate. We're talking a little about James Harden right off the top before we went on the air. And we should also talk about one of the other premier players in the space, transition, Thrive Fantasy. It's a new DFS app where players draft a lineup built of prop bets of only top-tier athletes. You pick 10 props out of the 20, and the less probable a prop is to occur, the more points it's worth, and that's where the game theory lies. So click the link. We're going to drop it to the YouTube chat right now. It's bit.ly/Osmo. You can download the Thrive Fantasy app. You get $10 on any $10 deposit, $20 on a $100 deposit, and $50 for a $200 deposit or more. So go get in there now. Click that link, deposit. Let's talk about one guy on Thrive right off top, Eddie, who's going to be one of the more popular guys on the slate, Nikola Vucevic. They have him at an over-under 19.5 points. For the over, you get 95. For the under, you get 105. Would you go over-under Vucevic for 19.5?
I'll take the under. I like a couple other guys in that game a little bit more. I'm always a big fan, and that's a good place to start because it lets me go on. I generally try to look for, again, we sort of changed the format of Live Before Lock to be more discussion-based, more game theory-based, less of a fifth consecutive rundown by the Awesome crew today, because I really think the guys I work with are incredibly clever. So once you've heard Josh take one or two passes at the entire slate, and Adam take one or two passes at the entire slate, and Lofty take one or two passes at the entire slate, it's not that I don't think me going over all 100 fantasy relevant players in the 8 games would be different on like 7 of them, but that's a ton of dead time. We put out a podcast, we put out an early show, the show before this one for an hour is obviously really focused on that, so it just seems a better use of time to sort of bounce around. And one of the things I try to look for is guys I like more than I think the field does a lot, and I have to guess because I rarely have time to see those earlier shows, may not have been discussed on the earlier shows. And when you bring up Vooch, that brings me to a guy I feel that way about, and that's Aaron Gordon. I have an interesting sequence of notes, and I've watched a lot of Aaron Gordon, Blake Griffin footage, and it's almost like Aaron Gordon is showing Blake Griffin, like, remember when you could do all of this? Like, Blake Griffin has obviously evolved tremendously as a basketball player. I don't mean to take anything away from him in that aspect. His dribble is better, his handle is better. He has a very good three-point shot as opposed to having no three-point shot. He can play point forward. Like, Blake Griffin deserves a ton of credit for being one of those guys who comes into the league as an athletic freak and then turning into a really good basketball player. Because there was a while that it was just like, yeah, all he does is just jump over everyone. And that brings in, and just, you know, that was a lot of his game. He's really evolved to having a really impressive skill set for a guy of his size. But Aaron Gordon handles him extremely well on both ends of the court. And literally, if you set aside, they've played each other, I believe the number is 5 times. I'll pull up the stats in a second to verify this. The first time was when Gordon was more of in his infancy as a player. And so I'm going to set that aside. The other 4 times, Aaron Gordon has outscored Blake Griffin. Just really? Outscored him.
That's surprising.
And that includes 3 games in the calendar year 2018. So I'm not even talking like once this year, once last year, twice last year, which were in the calendar year 2018. 1 time this year when these 2 teams already played. Aaron Gordon outscored him every single time. And I'm not incredibly surprised by that. I have Blake Griffin projected 2.5 points higher, in fairness. But at the significant discount, at what I imagine in our ownership looks like a pretty low price for a guy who has come off 2 very good games in a row. Aaron Gordon obviously looked pretty shitty for a while. It is not the best matchup for Vooch, so I'm bucking for a 3rd straight one there. You know, with a lot of teams on this slate. Aaron Gordon, I think, probably one of the guys, if you somehow, you know, could download my brain and program a differential of how much I like guys versus how much the collective zeitgeist of DFS players like guys, I imagine Aaron Gordon pretty close to the top of that list.
We've got Aaron Gordon at 8% projected ownership on DraftKings, so not a lot of people on him. I actually noticed his last couple games. It seems like he's actually positively correlated with Mo Bamba being out.
Yeah, that certainly could. I haven't had time to watch a lot of those games, so unfortunately I'm going to have to say that sounds very plausible without having any actual experiential data to back it up at this point. But okay, yeah, I can totally believe that that's the case. Yeah, so you know, there's my thing about it, but that's just one of the cases in which the tape to a certain degree and the stats certainly and the recent performance and the ownership all add up to me into a play that I'm pretty excited about. So
Yeah, to close out the Thrive thing, I would take Vucevic at the over 22.7 points, but I think the Magic are an interesting play. They are the first game up, so go check it out. Click the link to go check out Thrive now, deposit, get that fast release money. Click the link in YouTube now. Eddie, let's talk about the James Harden conundrum. We talked about it a little before we came on. His price is up now, $13K on DraftKings, $14K on FanDuel. It's a big chunk of your budget there. I feel pretty comfortable with him. I like him in the spot here. I like that the Vegas total is up for the Rockets. I like that House isn't going to be there, even though they're getting Gordon back. I think that kind of comes out in the wash overall. And again, Harden had a 60% usage rate last time out versus Memphis. I think that same usage rate here and what's technically a pace up versus the Nets could be pretty good. How are you feeling about Harden's shot tonight?
Yeah, I am. I like James Harden a lot, but there's one thing I want to mention here. Whenever you're evaluating any player, there's a ton of factors to look at, but the three relativistic sort of ones that we should be talking about is one, the price, and obviously that's way the hell up. But the other two, when you're dealing with a guy at Harden's price, are how decent the value is, and the better way to phrase that is sort of how shitty do all the other plays on my lineup get because I'm playing James Harden. So if I play 14 grand for Harden and 13 grand for depending on FanDuel or DraftKings, if I spend 14 or 13 grand for him, how much worse am I making the rest of my lineup? Because even if I think, hey, Harden's going to get me 85, if that forces me to build a lineup that point per dollar or just amortizes out to costing me 25 fantasy points, then the Harden thing isn't going to work anyway. So if you get done and you look at your lineup and like, Jesus, my whole lineup is Joe Harris, Etuan Moore, Jalen Brunson, this isn't going to work out. And you're like, you can still like James Harden. So you need to A, look at the price, B, look at what that price costs you, not just in dollars, but in other plays on your lineup. And then C, and I think most importantly, look at other guys who can hit a ceiling and what their prices are. If you look at one of the only days recently where Harden wasn't in the best possible lineups and wasn't in the tournament-winning lineups on DK, it was the shorter slate the other day where you had Steph Curry go for 70 and Jokic go for 65. So Harden putting up 75 was just decidedly unnecessary. So you are looking at a game environment where we have Anthony Davis, obviously still obscenely expensive on FanDuel and dollar per dollar, same price on Yahoo, but really cheaper on DraftKings. So you need him to score a significant differential there. And then you also have, it's not impossible to pull 55, 60 out of a guy like Drew Holiday. It's not impossible to get 60 or 70 out of Durant or out of Steph Curry or out of some of the other studs on, Kawhi in theory. Giannis is playing. I hate his spot and I don't want to go there, but all those other, so the other options really matter as well. So I am probably for the first time in a few weeks slightly a bigger fan of not playing than playing. I imagine if I'm building one lineup on FanDuel, I don't think he gets in there. On DraftKings, it's a much, much closer. Because also DraftKings, the way they score is so much different. FanDuel, you're losing the full one for a turnover. And I have Harden projected for 7 turnovers. So, that costs him 3.5 points versus DK. He gets a double-double or a triple-double. That's costing him another 1.5 or 4.5 versus DK. 3-pointers, he probably is going to make, what are we going to say on average, 6. That costs him another 3 points versus DK. So he has one of the largest differentials I've ever seen in the numbers I work with, from expected FanDuel score to expected DK score, where I also project him for literally a little more than 10 more on DraftKings. So the combination of those things makes me probably slightly inclined to play without him in one lineup on FanDuel and slightly inclined to play with him in one lineup on DraftKings.
Yeah, so I think there might be some opportunity, and this is where I'm viewing it, at least on DraftKings, is going over the field might make more sense because he's at 20% projected ownership on DraftKings. And we are awaiting an update. That's been one that's been in the cooker for a couple hours, I think. So I'm sure we'll have one throughout the show. But if he's going to be that low owned, to me, I always want Harden at least 50% with his run he's having, because I don't see the reason not to with how he's played. I feel like having that certain 70 points, it's hard to top that, or 65, 70, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, but I'm saying if you plug in Harden for 70 tonight and then run your projections on the rest of the slate, so run your projections and put 70 in for the number on Harden, I don't think he's probably in your best lineup on FanDuel. It's possible if everybody really flats, but more likely than not, he doesn't end up in there. So yeah, I think he's becoming closer to appropriately priced. He's still a tremendous play. I still have him projected even on FanDuel for very nearly 70 fantasy points and well over that on DraftKings. So certainly I don't think there's an empirical right or wrong answer here, and we'll certainly never know because you're going to get a sample size of 1, which isn't going to tell you a damn thing. But my guess is that due to the the extra value, the number of studs who I do think carry an upside with them, I would be inclined to have him in my first lineup on DraftKings and probably not have him in my first lineup on FanDuel.
Yeah, that seems fair to me. Yeah, he's hitting my max cap at 70 on DraftKings, but overall, that seems like a decent spot to be at with James Harden on DraftKings. Also, ownership was just updated, so we'll take a look and see where he's at. Checking it now. I feel like this one we can just close the loop on real fast. And by the way, if you're not a member of Osmo.com, the way to get our ownership projections and rankings from Osmo, as well as Fast Eddie's rankings, which are in the premium Slack today because of some tech hiccups, and also Josh Engelman's projections, use the promo code LiveBeforeLock, get 50% off your first month with us. It's about as good of a deal as you're going to find online from any of the sites in the space. So go check it out now. Ownership update, Harden up to 22%. I don't know, man. I wouldn't feel comfortable at less than 50.
Yeah, I'm very meh with that particular bit of information. Like, I totally get it. Like, he's I got a tweet. It said something like someone was watching a different show, and I don't know if it was on our site or another, and they had a conversation as to whether or not Harden was more likely to get 100 or 50 tonight, as in 50 or less, or 100 or more. And I'm sorry, I don't know what show that was, but yeah, that is an interesting question to me. But I do think 50 or less is remarkably more likely. Like, I would say the odds of Harden, and we'll use DK scoring to make it reasonably possible, getting to 100 tonight are, I could not imagine they are higher than 5%. And he's a guy with 100-point upside, but we've seen it twice in many, 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 many games. But I do think his average in a situation like tonight, his average is somewhere, like I project him for somewhere around 77 DK points, which feels preposterous. But I still think less than 50 is more likely than that because you almost get to 5% of the time if you count injury. Like, what percentage of games does James Harden miss more than 7 minutes due to injury or something is several percent, and then multiple foul trouble, and then ridiculous blowout, and you just get it there without even getting into, apocryphally terrible shooting game, which, again, as we've established, needs to be incredibly terrible for him to be that bad, because, again, we had the 1 for 17 from 3 game. He had 75 DK points, which, again, is one of my favorite things ever.
Actually, good question in the YouTube chat right now. What are your thoughts on Harden for FanDuel cash, and I guess just cash in general?
I think he's great. I do not think he is a must. I can see ways of getting around it. I currently have him in my DK cash build that I made earlier today and not in the FanDuel one. But I was back and forth with putting him in the FanDuel one. Again, it depends if we get news on Lillard and things like that. There's a lot of different ways to go. DraftKings, yeah, I think you almost certainly have him in there. But I really like having Anthony Davis in there as well, and having them both is incredibly difficult. So I don't think he's a must. So I think you build your cash game lineup full of guys you really like, and if you can make enough moves to end up with James Harden and still feel like, yeah, that's in a pretty good spot, then okay, there you go. Go ahead and do that. If he doesn't end up in there, I wouldn't feel bad at the price he's at. I would certainly be more inclined to having him in there. If you can't manage to get that done, I wouldn't feel too dreadful about it.
Actually, take me over to the other side with Rocket. And actually, no, before we switch to the net side, because I think that's important to talk about with some of the guys there. The Rocket side, Dan Wellhouse, you mentioned up top. He's back in the G League, couldn't negotiate a deal to stay with the team because I think they wanted to sign a 3-year deal. He didn't want to do that. So he's back down to the G League. Some Gary Clark love I've seen today, which I'm not quite buying into. But what do you think that does to affect the Rockets' rotation? Is there anybody who's opening up some value there with no Dan Wellhouse available?
There's also no James Ennis, which is news that came out about 20 or 30 minutes ago. So that does end up being relevant. I haven't seen what I consider reputable news on a minutes limit for Eric Gordon, who is a guy with an extensive a medical pastor. We have had any number of times going back to 6-7 years ago where I can remember Eric Gordon having issues staying healthy, and he's returning, and the last thing they want is him going out again. They obviously don't want to just straight up concede this game, but you have to wonder how many minutes he gets. They picked up what's his name, James Nunnally. I think his last stop was with the Timberwolves. I know he was their summer league. Who's basically plays the 2 and the 3, is a good spot-up shooter, is a slightly worse Gerald Green, I suppose I would say. But yeah, so that news comes into, you're going to get a similar rotation to what we've seen recently, which is around 40 for Harden, around 40 for Rivers, around 40 for PJ Tucker, and then you end up with sort of the mess behind that. You saw last game where I tried to caution a lot of people. I don't think you get 48 center minutes. I was looking at projections that whole day, and it was like, oh, okay, I think we get 24 minutes in Nene and 12 minutes of Marquise Chris and 12 minutes of Isaiah Hartenstein. And I was like, they have no need to play a traditional center 48 minutes. And I think they ended up doing it for 28. I think you got 14, 7, and 7 out of those three aforementioned guys, Nene and the two scrubs coming up. And again, against the Nets, this is very likely to go that same way, which is one of the things that also, on the side, to save a question, makes Jared Allen a playable but not strong play for me, because I do think the most likely situation is like 26 minutes for him and like 22 for Ed Davis, because I do think this game is very likely to end up just going really small. There's still a big ceiling for Jared Allen. If he starts playing really well, or if you get a third consecutive game of obscene Ed Harris foul trouble, then Ed Harris.
Apollo 13 had a very tough set.
Oh, God. That Pollock autobiography movie was good. But let's try Ed Davis. Also, shout out for The Rock. I'm a big Ed Davis fan. I got Ed Davis on the mind. Beautiful blue eyes. The Abyss. Anyway, Ed Harris, Ed Davis. Right. So if Fast Eddie gets in foul trouble again, then they will let him, play out the string. And that's what we saw last game, where he probably would have played 27, 28 minutes. Eric Gordon starting and limited to 24 minutes. Right on the nose. All right, not changing a damn thing. That's what I had him projected for. So yeah, I'd love to turn around and be like, oh, it's amazing now. You're going to get a few extra minutes of Gerald Green, but his price came up. He's like 47 or so. I don't want to spend 47 on Gerald Green, but he's a little, more attractive now. I think you get 14 minutes out of Nunnally is what I have him for. I have Gary Clark at 24 minutes, and he's not a very exciting fantasy player. Maybe you get 28. Marquise Chris, I have at 9 minutes. Maybe you get 5. Maybe you get 17. It's still a mess. So no, I don't think we can really take those absences and do a lot with them. Really, for this team, because of the dominating usage, really, Harden is very much in play. That's one of the understatements of the year. You can fire bullets at, on FanDuel especially. You can play in Austin Rivers. That is a way of getting there. You can play Gerald Green in a tournament. You can play PJ Tucker. I like him less in this game than I did earlier this week, and I have a good rapport with PJ Tucker. He usually gets there for me. And you can play Gary Clark, but he's a legit bad fantasy player. And when you're a bad fantasy player, and then you get put on the cart with James Harden using 60% of the damn usage, you're asking for a lot of good things to happen. So I have him, currently at 24 minutes and 15 and a half fantasy points. So you can do it. He's 30, whatever the hell. But there are other guys I would rather, I'd rather really try to find $400 and play a guy who has pretty easy 30-point upside like Shelvin Mack. I'm not surprised if I see 30 out of Shelvin Mack tonight. He does that with fair regularity. And he's the guy they like to lean on when there's a couple extra minutes floating around in that rotation. And that's what's most likely to happen with I think Shelvin Mack ended up being an A in my GPP rankings today, which feels dirty because he is just not good. But the most likely scenario is he is 28, 29, and in my rankings, and I think any decent ranking system, everything is relative. The best value ends up being an A ranking, and he's not quite the best, but he's certainly in the top 3 or 4 value plays today, so he gets an A, because if you're playing tournament value, well, one of those guys should be him. So I would try not to play Clark if I could avoid it. He is sort of a cash punt for me, where you can drop him. That obviously makes a lot of sense. I'd have to see how relative the other $10 guys are on Yahoo, for example. But
while we're talking about this game, let's go to the other side real fast. The guy you mentioned, would you play Jared Allen in cash on FanDuel? Don't Embiid my status is asking in premium Slack.
No, I would rather play Tristan Thompson at, I believe, a couple $100 less. I would rather play Al Horford also at very similar prices. I will double check my numbers because they are both right in that 60-something range. Give me just a minute. But I'm pretty sure for that money off Jared, let me check my FanDuel prices. I want to make sure I didn't get it twisted. Jared Allen, 65. No, I would rather play the two guys at 6,400 in cash. I would rather play Horford or Tristan Thompson, both of whom cost $100 less before I went to Allen. I think Allen is just fine in tournaments. I like him more in tournaments, certainly, than Tristan. It'd be close between him and Horford for me. But I'd rather play either of them. I'd rather play DeAndre Jordan in cash if you have randomly the $700 extra, which you probably don't. But no, I don't think Jared Allen in cash is a very good idea. Just because I think there's a very good chance that even if he, say, doesn't get in foul trouble, which is not, by the way, impossible, James Harden crashing into the center position.
Yeah, foul trouble is a big concern for me there. I would think.
Exactly. There's foul trouble, which is non-cashy. And then also just the fact that I think this game goes small, and when that happens, I think there's a real chance that they try to give 20-plus minutes to Ed Davis, and those come strictly off Jared Allen's total. I think he's fine in terms just because the upside is there. He's in there against Nene, so he can hang out around the basket a ton. We saw in the last game that, if Ed gets in foul trouble, he can start boosting up some real numbers. So fine in tournaments, but for cash, I'd rather play Tristan or Al.
Yeah, I think the Jared Allen risk is very real there, and especially with the way, I don't know if you've paid attention that closely to it, but it seems like he's really going after blocks on star players, and he's gotten a bunch.
He has blocked LeBron. I saw that highlight video where he blocked LeBron, Giannis, Anthony Davis, and Drummond at least. And I don't know if there are others on top of that. But yeah, he is, and that's one of the reasons, one of the most curious things in fantasy basketball is you have guys who are good at accruing defensive stats, guys who are good defensively, and guys who actually oppose the opposing team's bigs and the opposing team's driving players defensively. And those four things make this weird Venn diagram that overlap very differently for different guys. So you have like Anthony Davis, who is excellent defensively, who is excellent at putting up defensive stats, who is excellent at stopping guys who drive to the rim, but is occasionally dog shit against other guys who hang out around the basket. And you get things like 80 points out of Karl Anthony Towns not that long ago, and all sorts of interesting things in that matchup. So it's a very weird situation when you talk about centers, especially in fantasy sports.
There is some breaking news here. Justin Holiday's picking up the start for the Grizzlies today. I want to talk about that, but let's just close off this Nets game because one guy we should talk about, actually two, D'Angelo Russell, Spencer Dinwiddie. Spencer Dinwiddie, he was called out for slumping. Then Kenny Atkinson apologized for calling him out for that. We had some questions in premium Slack about why he's so terrible. But on the other side as well, want to know your thoughts on Russell before we go to the Justin Holiday news.
I love him. He's a monster. He's been playing really, really well. Fantasy points in 6 of his last 8. There's one game in there where he played like 24 minutes and had 7 fantasy points. Like he had the most disappointing game ever in the middle there. But a Rockets team that hits some, just because of the nature of how they're forced to play right now and how much energy Harden's expending on the other end of the court, has opened up some big ass gaps in their backcourt defense. So, yeah.
Also, Justin Holiday, talk about him real fast. Is that affecting thing for you? This is a Milwaukee team giving up a ton of threes. So actually, I'm interested in Gary Temple a little bit today for that reason. But Holiday as well has been known to be a gunner from deep. Not that he's been so far in Memphis, but what do you think about him in the starting lineup?
I'm going to check his prices real quick everywhere, but he has been just dog shit terrible. Mm-hmm. I mean, literally, you're looking at like 0.2 fantasy points. So he is a guy who we can hope will put up some reasonable number of shots. We like the matchup for Milwaukee with a player of his purposes. He's 3,400 on DK. I don't hate him in tournaments. You're going to get him at 5% owned. There's a 90% chance. Well, there's an 80% chance he's going to disappoint you. There's an 18% chance he's going to put up 18 to 26 fantasy points and not matter at all. But there's a chance that someone from the front office came down and said to Bickerstaff, hey, we just traded 2 dudes and 2 picks for this guy, who has been a regular NBA starter with some very good games for a while now. How about you start him as opposed to your 3rd, 4th, 5th string guys? And he goes out there and takes 20 shots and makes 11 of them and randomly puts up 40 at 3% owned. So I don't have an issue if someone wants to play him in tournaments, understanding it's risky as all hell. On FanDuel, he is... I will take a look at this. Justin. He is the minimum on FanDuel. I'm absolutely fine with him as drop guy for obvious reasons. And Yahoo, I presume he's $10. So, yeah, Yahoo, really not inclined. There's some pretty good 10s, and you'd really need something bizarre to happen. Right now, I would now project him for 24 minutes and like 18 fantasy points. Maybe 16, and that's probably high. He's looked dreadful, actually. Probably be like 24 and 14. But the start is nice, so the net effect of that would be he's now doable on DraftKings if you like to live dangerously, just fine to play on FanDuel on a day where there just isn't a lot of great value. pretty much demolishes any faith I had in Javon Carter. Makes me a little more concerned about Shelvin Mack. That's probably the net effects all around. They're probably, I guess, a minor ding off Omri Caspi as well, if you were thusly inclined. I think Garrett Temple's just fine. Slightly in tournaments would prefer Shelvin Mack, although this changes that a touch, but not really. I think the bench rotations probably stay pretty close to identical, though there's when you see a change like this, and they did just trade for him, and when I said the front office went down there and said, hey, what the fuck, I'm not speaking entirely whimsically there. Like, that happens and would make a lot of sense in this scenario, that someone went, hey, coach, got a dude, how about, like, I know he's been shit, but maybe give him some time and see how it works out. So, you know, so I'm a little less secure in Shelvin Mack's role, but yeah, so there's my take on Justin Oladai.
Other starting news, Gary Clark is officially picking up the start alongside PJ Tucker.
Yep.
Does that affect your views on him at all? Especially on FanDuel where you could drop his score.
Yeah, he's fine. I mean, in tournaments, I would rather play guys who I think carry a higher upside. If you're saying, I believe Gary Clark's small forward on FanDuel. I would rather play Rodney Hood at $4,100. I would rather play Etuan Moore at $4,300. I would rather, so like, if the $800 matters to you, then yeah, by all means put him in there as a guy who you probably are dropping. And it really depends how many other under 4K guys you have. How stars and scrubsy you're getting would really change my take there. But you should look at him as a $3,500 guy who's probably going to get you a number in the mid-teens, and you will need to drop if you're hoping for any kind of ceiling score. If that works in your construction, I suppose I will look at the FanDuel small forward pool and see if there's anyone at like 3,600 or less I would rather play over him, because that's really what it comes down to. Like I listed, you know, I think Rodney Hood could get you 30 fantasy points. He costs $4,100. I would rather do that. I would be gobsmacked if you got 30 fantasy points out of Gary Clark. Carmelo Anthony. I hear that guy's good.
Gary Clark also a .63 fantasy point per minute player on the year.
He's and that's fine for a guy who is a little bit more of a defensive specialist and a rookie. And I'd be pretty surprised if he was doing better than that. So I am not throwing shade on his. I would much rather play Norman Powell in a tournament. That game can blow out against Boston, or just like there's any number of ways in which he hits to some sort of more. Ceiling score. Again, they have all hands back on deck again. Normally not a guy I'm looking to play, but yeah. So there's my take on Gary Clark. And also I expect he's going to end up being like 12% owned now, because he's a guy who's minimum price, who's starting, and all the value is shit, and people don't pay that close attention, and poof, all of a sudden lots of Gary Clark in our lives.
We are at the halfway point of the show, so let's do a little halftime Daddy Likes. Ownership is updated just a few short minutes ago, so check that out if you are a premium member of awesemo.com. And if you're not, use the promo code live before lock for 50% off your first month. See everything else that everybody else is seeing. We're going to go through the top 5 guys. They are loading as I speak. Klay Thompson, number 1 on the list, 27% ownership on DraftKings. How are you feeling about Klay there, Daddy?
I won't like Klay. Daddy will not like Klay Thompson today, though. His 4 dunks were very impressive, and I always enjoy his social media presence. I just like that game a lot, and he actually ranks as my least favorite of the 4 main Warriors. Again, he is a little bit more of a predictable quantity. This game frequently goes other ways. It's not that you can't get, that ceiling game out of him, but having watched at least some similarity to this team. They've played 1 game earlier this year. They played the 5 games in the postseason last year. I would much rather look at the other 3 guys. I'm more excited about playing Draymond or Durant or Steph than I am playing Klay Thompson. And if he's the most expensive, or most owned, pardon me. Sorry, doing 3 things at once. If he ends up being the most owned of those guys, yeah, I would be disinclined towards playing him. I would much rather play same price Draymond, who does very well against the Pelicans and has for a while, and I don't see any reason that should change. Obviously, he can't make any goddamn points, but he's like literally averaging 10 assists, and this is just an environment where I think the steals and the blocks come, and the pace is there, and just all sorts of goodies could happen here, so I would rather play any of the other Warrior studs than Klay Thompson. So Daddy dislikes Klay.
All right, how's Daddy feel about James Harden at 22% projected ownership?
I like it. I would probably want more than that on DraftKings, so Daddy likes James Harden.
I would concur. Another Warrior on the list, Kevon Looney, number 3 at 21% after just setting his rebounding career high yesterday. How do you feel about Looney?
Again, I will look other ways. It's a fine spot, and again, value is shit. It's just at that point where he's owned, he's not a guy who frequently is going to hit any sort of ceiling. So for tournament purposes, I'll generally dislike that. There's other guys that are around that. I mean, he's 40. What the hell's his number on DK? I don't recall his price.
4,100.
41?
Yep.
Yeah, that's fine. That's very good cash value, and there is a ceiling there. I just I would be disinclined towards playing him. If I was playing 150 lineups, I would want less than 30 Kevon Looney's. He's fine. But, again, at ownership, I might as well have guys I project very similarly who are owned less. But it makes sense. That game has all the pace in the damn world. So,
Kevin Durant, 19% ownership.
Yeah, that's about right. I guess I'll slightly take the over. He is priced well. I'm projected for over 50. He's just point per dollar, a really nicely priced guy who does obviously have a ceiling well on top of that in the game of the evening. So, slightly would want a bit more. So, Daddy likes that.
And last but not least, in top 5, Rudy Gobert, 18%. I was going to try to do a Cosby voice, but I don't think I have it in me.
Why a Cosby voice?
Rudy, or whatever. The child was Rudy on the Cosby Show.
That's interesting. The only, for some reason, the only player I would ever use a Cosby voice on is whenever we talk about Shabazz Napier, who will play, by the way. I had a whole gimmick worked up for, Lillard is going to be out and Shabazz is going to be out, and that's because they used to be, starter and backup in Portland, and then it just didn't work out. But for some reason, I always hear Shabazz, whether it be Napier or Muhammad, in Bill Cosby's voice. So I always hear like Shabazz, like it always just comes out that way to me. I don't know what it is, but that's interesting. That's where you went with that.
A lot of unwilling women heard that noise too from Bill Cosby.
No, they probably didn't hear it because it would hit the floor and he'd be like, "Oh, Shabazz!" I'm like, it's time to.
Dark joke.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Who were we talking
Rudy
about?
Gobert, though.
Sorry.
He's been killing it since all the point guards went out, rebounding at a crazy rate.
Gobert.
Yep.
Yeah. There we go. Yeah. He's too cheap on DK. Obviously, we like to match up all sorts of pace in the world, so that's fine with me. I would take the over on that as well. He's just underpriced. I do think there is a big ass salary there. I don't think he's out of play on FanDuel for $1,400 more or whatever the hell it is. So yeah, Daddy likes.
All right, so there we go. And then Draymond Green on the outside, another guy we just talked about, but
yep.
He does look good at the number 6 ownership.
Yeah, it does. I definitely like. It would be very surprising for me if you didn't want a Warrior in the best possible lineup. Maybe it's 2, probably not more than that. But yeah, I would be cycling through a whole lot of Warriors, and probably for quantity due to price and trying to get Harden in or Davis in. I imagine my amounts would be the most of Draymond, the second most of Durant, the third most of Steph. And the fourth most. Then actually, I would probably have more Looney than Clay, believe it or not.
Ooh, I have a good amount of Looney, but I also have a good amount of Clay. Clay's got a nice floor to him, I think. But it does feel weird coming off of a big game.
It's again just having watched a lot of games, reviewed all the stats, running through what I expect to be projections. I think he's fine, but I think he's going to get 33, 34 tonight. He's not bad because fastest game of the day, $6,400 or whatever, and Klay Thompson can score 80. That certainly is a possibility. I'm not trying to shake you away of, but hasn't been the best in the 6 games that I've watched recently between these two teams. Which again, the staffing changes. You obviously have. At the end of last year, you have no Julius Randle, which changes things up a bit. The teams are certainly not identical, but sees a fair amount of Drew, and I'm a little more inclined towards the other guys. And if he's going to be the most popular, I'm fine putting my flag in that. Like, to absolutely destroy me, he needs to put up 50. It's a big enough slate that if he randomly puts up 43, I don't think you're dead. So I hope that you get the random, crappy game. And if you look at that sample I'm talking about, those 6 games of this year plus the postseason series. You see that literally Durant led the team in fantasy points twice, and Draymond did it 3 times out of those games. You have multiple 55s and 60s out of Draymond in just that limited sample. So, and due to price and everything else, a little more inclined towards Durant than Steph. So, there it is.
Sweet boy Rinpack asking about a game some people are curious about. Damian Lillard's status up in the air. He's questionable right now. What's your stance? Do you think he plays? And if not, where would you go instead?
I have no take on that. I haven't sometimes I get into chasing down beat reporters, reading all sorts of stuff. I haven't seen any secondhand indirect sources on Lillard, so I know everything you do that he very possibly won't go. I would not be shocked. I think it is more likely that he sits because it's the Cavs. I do think that probably factors into someone's calculus where they're like, look, dude, it's a long year. You had to rest sometime anyway, maybe. Maybe sit this one out against the Cavs. They do not play on a back-to-back. The Warriors do, obviously. The Warriors and the Bucks are on the back end. They played yesterday. The Raptors play tomorrow, which I should point this out. I think there's a 1% chance that randomly Kawhi Leonard doesn't play. I said this last time, and people joked at me and went, no, you idiot. They said they're going to stop that. And then on the back end, they said, yeah, we're going to rest him. So I don't think it's likely, but I should just point that out, that they have literally said, we're going to stop resting him on back-to-backs 3 times and then continue to do it. It's an 8 o'clock game.
Uncle Dennis must have stepped in.
I'm pretty shocked if they rest him against the Celtics on less than an hour notice. So I say that largely out of sort of frustration for them having done it previously. But no, I don't think that is actually going to happen. But the Raptors are on the front end of a back-to-back to just bring that into, just to mention that.
How are you feeling about the Kyrie matchup there and a lot of rumors kind of swirling around there, some weird reactions, some weird infighting going on? But he put up 70 versus the Raptors earlier this year, and Kawhi also has had big games. I kind of like that back and forth with those two in a couple lineups. How are you feeling about that?
Yeah, definitely. Kyrie, it's interesting to point out that I almost don't dislike many of his tougher matchups as much as for almost any other players because his minutes are so much more variable. Like, the Celtics frequently lay the hammer down on people, and they beat, I don't know, Orlando by 42, and Kyrie gets literally 24, 25 minutes. In close games, he gets 34, 35 minutes. So you just end up with him being one of the guys I'm more inclined to play up for in difficult matchups, especially in defensively difficult matchups against the Raptors, because he's close to matchup proof. In those tight games, he tends to run out there some extra time, and you can get, for example, 70 out of him in this matchup. So, especially on FanDuel, where he's even slightly more mispriced, I like him a lot. I like Kyrie Irving just fine. Probably just tournaments because of the existence of Harden and Davis, and punting to guys like DJ Augustine makes, I think, a little more sense for your cash builds, but I think he's an excellent tournament play. Like Al Horford on DK at 5,900. This is the third time this year these two teams are getting together. You alluded to the game where Kyrie was the best player on the Celtics. In the other game, it was Al Horford. Obviously, his minutes are still a little bit limited. But in a close game, I think we expect him to play 30 to 32 again, and I have certainly some interest in that at $5,900 on DK. You can play him at forward, etc., etc. But certainly not a matchup with two very deep teams, both coming healthy, both above average defensively, that I'm killing myself to get into. So it's really, I get having Kawhi just for the percentage. I definitely like Irving for the reasons discussed. Horford on DK. Marcus Morris on FanDuel. 4,900 is just still too inexpensive for a guy who, floor of 18, 20, ceiling of 40. Just under 5K is just still too cheap for FanDuel pricing. So I get that. Should he show up in any of your lineups? Probably just tournaments, but that's about it. Not a game I would want to be over the moon on. I want to mention DeMar DeRozan. I like DeMar DeRozan quite a bit.
Actually, wait. Hold that thought, because I was actually just going to transition to DeMar DeRozan because somebody's asking about him. But also, somebody's asking about him on Yahoo. And on another site, while we're talking about other sites, there is a prop on Thrive Fantasy for DeMar DeRozan. So a lot of DeMar DeRozan chatter across the industry. But let's do the Thrive prop, Eddie. Over under 21.5 points. On the over, you get 90 points. On the under, you get 110.
Oh, well, I'll take the over, which you probably could have guessed when I was bringing him up to talk about. But I will
under. Yep, 20.9. So go ahead, give me your spiel. Give me your Yahoo thoughts on DeRozan, but give me every site too.
Yeah, I just think a lot more of the attention has focused to Aldridge. He is legit cheaper, 2 out of 3 or 3 out of 3 of the main sites than Aldridge, and I do like him a little bit more in this situation. Had I believe 60 fantasy points against them earlier this year, and none of their players categorized as able to stop him if possible. So purely for the ownership and the price being down and the ceiling, again, it's not that different from, I don't know, Dinwiddie, I suppose, in that you're spending 8K on DeRozan, and there's some sort of reasonably safe floor that isn't going to kill you. And Gay being back will take a few people away. It's not the best matchup. Aldridge playing much better recently. Him not playing that well himself recently. But there's 55, 60 fantasy point ceiling here, and at the ownership and at the price, that's still just an attractive package for me, and I do have him projected as the highest scoring player on his team. And having Gay in, while I don't look at it as great news for him, isn't data supported that big of a deal for him. And I think, going back to version 1 of this team, there's just a real chance that they want allow DeRozan to get whatever he can get, and I think that's quite a bit here.
So question from Jeff in the premium Slack while we're talking Spurs. What do we think about Rudy Gay tonight?
I think he's a stretch as a tournament play without knowing exactly, how much time they're going to give him. I think he's, a perfectly valid tournament play where there's a ceiling, and there's just a lot of ways it doesn't work out that well. Obviously, next to DeRozan, it's getting a little sideways, but he's fine. I mean, on a slate like this, especially where his price is now down in the 5s, he's been very, very good this year. Like, I don't think people have understood how well Rudy Gay has played this year. His shooting percentages have been outstanding. His defense has been really good. And this isn't that surprising as players, coming back from serious Achilles issues frequently. They take a year and a half, 2 years, 2.5 years to get back to, but he's playing almost as well as he ever has. So I still couldn't endorse it in cash because Popovich and who knows exactly how many minutes, and again I like DeRozan a lot, but yeah, if I see Rudy Gay in a lineup, I think okay, that's a smart play. That's worth the risk.
Somebody in the YouTube chat saying that Lillard is out, but I'm not seeing that yet. So we do to lie about news in the chat. I guess maybe not. Multiple people saying it. Not seeing it. You seeing Lillard out?
Well, let's talk about it in the event that he does sit. And again, I thought that was a little more likely than not anyway. I already liked McCollum on the FanDuel. Everything points there. He has been shooting not that well recently and just hasn't been doing that well. But we've seen more time with him controlling the one. Obviously, if he ends up being starting point guard, that's great. The price on FanDuel is especially advantageous. I think he's 6.5. Has played very well in the Cavs in the past. If that's a thing for you, it's one of his best team splits. The game stands to be a little bit closer if you get Lillard out of there. So taking Lillard out makes me like everyone in the game a little bit more. So it adds Seth Curry, I think, as my favorite of the much more exciting value plays. It's specifically a feather in the cap of Evan Turner, in which case we would also want to see Mo Harkless not play if that was the case. So it doesn't end up changing a lot for me, except for completely explicating Damian Lillard from my lineups. But other than that, I think, and now you can, I mean, certainly a smart thing to do on DraftKings today is to have little or no exposure to the first damn game anyway. Maybe say Justin, I don't know, Aaron Gordon, but just have one player, no players, and then relook at all this shit at, 1 hour from now, in which you're going to have a lot of answers on those late games, and that's going to be one of them.
Yeah, to be clear, the Lillard news not official yet, but people are murmuring about it, and they might just be trolls. So just keep an eye on that. Keep an eye on that closely, because that is obviously one that's going to affect everything according to how Eddie just lined it up.
Yeah,
do you have any thoughts you want to hit on?
I will say, sorry. For the spend up, it is McCollum, and McCollum is great. Nurkic gets a little more frenetic. There's actually ends up being a number of ways it goes badly for him in that situation, but ends up having a higher ceiling and more likely that he plays more minutes and all sorts of good stuff. So good for Nurkic. But number one guy is McCollum, and then after that, probably my interest would go Curry, Turner, Stauskas in that order for guys I would give a kick up to, and I'd want tournament exposure to all of them. And depending what their prices is, they might then slot in as perfectly reasonable cash plays. I'd have to look at the specific numbers.
Thoughts on Jae Crowder for DK GPP? He is somebody who pops up a decent amount in Osmo's rankings, and I forced him in there for that reason. How are you feeling about him?
Yeah, I like that a little more than Favors for a GPP, which is another guy we talk about. I think this leans a little more towards the small Jae Crowder, him getting the few more minutes, you getting 25 out of Favors instead of 28, 29. I'm going to actually use that to segue into someone else I like a little bit more, and just a question popped in front of me. I really like JaMychal Green. There are any number of ways in which this turns into a good play. JaMychal Green does not does not feel that different to me from someone else we talked about yesterday, which was Alex Len. Sort of ends up being a similar situation with, I can think of a lot of ways in which JaMychal Green ends up getting extra time. That's exactly what I said about Alex Len yesterday. Like, look, either Spellman gets into foul trouble or just this happens. There's just a lot of ways in which you get time, and that's the big bugaboo here. Now, Alex Len is a much better fantasy point per minute player than JaMychal Green, but we don't have a lot of great value options, and especially, FanDuel where you can drop him. It's as simple as, Marc Gasol. We know he's not 100%. He's got one elbow jacked up in one hand that was going numb for a lot of the last game. So it's certainly a way he gets a limited number of minutes, but it's also not that unlikely that you get foul trouble on Jaren Jackson Jr., who, again, this is the swan song, the second game between these two teams this year. And in the first game, you had Jaren Jackson Jr. play 15 minutes and get 5 fouls. So, we've seen that happen once already, and that's not surprising. Again, you're Jaren Jackson Jr., you're going to foul the popcorn guy in between plays, and you have Giannis crashing down the lane. That's not really surprising that that's how that went down. So, and additionally, we saw, a couple games back this weird lineup where they actually ran all three of those guys out there concurrently for about 6 minutes in the fourth quarter. And whereas this isn't a matchup where I find that to be the most likely thing to happen, there's just a lot of ways he can get there. And even if none of them happen, he's a guy who reasonably frequently will give you 30 fantasy points in the 25 minutes you should probably get anyway. So I like JaMychal Green versus a pretty tepid ownership. I would rather play him than Jae Crowder, for example, which is how we got there.
JaMychal usually pops, so he's one guy I feel like my projections for some reason are on more often than not. So I've been on a couple of outlier JaMychal Green days. He did not pop up for me today. So I think your point is totally valid. I just want to throw that out there because he's one of my near and dear guys. So I've argued with Josh about him before, and he had a monster day. JaMychal's one of my he's one of my guys.
I like him a ton in tournaments today. I don't think he makes cash even on FanDuel where he looks about the praise. Yahoo, he's 14. That's just tournaments. DK, it's just tournaments. FanDuel, I think if you're in that range, you're probably trying to play probably Maxi Kleber at the exact same price, I think. Markieff Morris, or Marcus Morris if you have the 300. Other guys I want to mention, I don't think Mirotic is out of play. I think he makes a very interesting tournament play against Golden State, which is a matchup that has looked great for him in the past in several games. I think they want to throw him more minutes. I have him right now in for 26. And again, small forward isn't that great. Him priced in the mid-5s. I think there's some chance he can savage that price. So certainly no issue with me, someone having some amount of exposure to Mirotic. I'm just looking through my notes for anyone else that I don't think.
Mirotic also coming off of a real season low performance. He's been bad since the ankle came back, but I agree. It could be a nice little bounce.
He's played 3 games since he came back and played. I will load it, but it's something like 24 minutes, 23 minutes, and then dear awful game I don't even want to think about. But those first 2 indicate that he was, I will game log it, let me look. 22 minutes, then 27 minutes. It's even better than I thought. And then 17 minutes where he made 0 shots and had 3.5 fantasy points against the Clippers, which looks like a pretty good matchup and had all the pace in the world. So, yeah, no one's going to want to go there. But 5,500 on DK, 58 I think he is on FanDuel, where small forward is always a bit of a bugaboo. I like some exposure to Mirotic. If I had 150 lineups, I'd have 10 Mirotic, which I have a feeling is at 6 2/3% ends up being over the field. Maybe I'd even have a little more than that because I'm not shocked to see him play 30 minutes and get 40 fantasy points here.
Our guy Greek Ink wondering while we're talking Pelicans bigs, your thoughts on Julius Randle on FanDuel tonight?
I need to check the number, but again, obviously certainly not out of play. Monster game, guy who can score a lot of fantasy points. So, but I imagine slightly disinclined. 7,800 on FanDuel, that's actually coming into a very tolerable price. So I'm fine with that. I think in cash I'm unlikely to land there. But just too cheap for the kind of upside he carries. So I'm a big fan of Julius Randle in tournaments. Again, this is obviously a night of very even ownership where high-owned guys are 18%. So you can almost just cast that aside and be like, does Randle project as a guy who could, bang me out 50 here? And yeah, he could be the highest scoring center tonight. Wouldn't be a shock for me. So I have absolutely no issue if you have a tournament lineup and you have Randle in it on FanDuel. I think that makes a ton of sense.
Would you rank, actually, no, thoughts on Elfrid Payton while we're still finishing up this Pelicans side for DK GPP in particular?
Yeah, I'm fine with that as well. Would slightly rather Mirotic at what I think is almost an identical price. I think Elf may cost, he costs $200 more, but they're clearly showing, the likelihood that they'll start giving Elf, his real minutes again. He's got 28, 27, 29 over his last 3 games. I think he is never getting over 32 or 33 anyway. So he's coming back to his full minutes, and so you're just looking at, basically full strength Elf against the Warriors, which isn't a great matchup for him, but the pace is enough that I think he's a fine tournament play. So it's not one of those, like, I used to be sort of the Elfrid Payton whisperer. This isn't a spot where I'm like, yes, he's going to do some real damage here. I'd rather play Drew than Elfrid, just as a chance, I think, of randomly banging out a ceiling there for the number of times I've seen that. But Elf had a good game against this modern Golden State iteration when he was with the Suns. Fairly certain, actually, totally certain this is his first game against them with the Pellies. But I think he's fine. Not great, but I'm fine if you have Elf in a lineup. So that's my full thought process there.
Rank Rudy Gobert, Luka Doncic, and DeMar DeRozan in raw points.
The three good men. I have them all within 1.7 fantasy points right now with Gobert, then Doncic, then DeRozan, all in the mid-40s. I like them all just fine on DK at that mid-8s price tag.
Do you have a stance on Doncic with DSJ or DSJ? Because I'm not big on playing Doncic whenever Dennis Smith is in the lineup personally.
Yeah, I would rather not have Dennis Smith playing. We still have no news, and I'm presuming he's not. I didn't miss anything, did I?
No, I think he's still questionable, but I was actually assuming he might be in, but I don't know if that's a fair assumption either.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie, $4,500 Dennis Smith makes sense. In the event they go, he's playing and starting, be ready to swing into that shit. But yes, you definitely want Doncic much more with DSJ not playing. So I certainly agree.
Any interest in Wes Matthews on DK?
Less today. And again, not a guy I talk about a lot and tends to be fairly predictable anyway. He's fine if you randomly threw him in a tournament or as part of a game stack. I have no issue with it. There is an upside there. And again, you want DSJ out, obviously, but not a guy I'm specifically targeting. So even more tepid on him than say Elfrid Payton. In 150 lineups, I'd have 2 or 3, but not over the moon about it.
Any interest in the Clippers bigs? Montrezl Harrell been over 30 minutes for a few games. I think you might have mentioned him briefly up top, but overall thoughts on those guys?
Yeah, generally I think I'm going to let them go. I don't have an issue with Harrell or Harris or Gallinari if you want to play them in lineups. I would have, again, single-digit shares in 150. But first lineup, no, I don't have a ton of interest. The matchup is not great, to say the very least, and I just don't think you need to push it. And having some, obviously I like Aaron Gordon a bit, so that's going to take me away from all those other guys who end up being basically power forwards of some sort, swing up or swing down as far as the positionality at very, very similar prices. So that to some degree limits my exposure, but liking Draymond a lot in the same range, and Al Horford where he's eligible in the same position. So I don't think any of those guys are dreadful tournament plays, but I would rather play all those other players I just referred to, so they would be certainly people I have minimal interest in.
Before people start funneling out, make sure to hit that like button on YouTube. Helps us out quite a bit. Let's see. Got a question here. Gay or Mirotic for a FanDuel GPP?
I would play Mirotic.
Let's see. DK GPP, Drew Holiday and Kevon Looney, or Elfrid Payton and Draymond?
Say again, please.
Drew Holiday and Kevon Looney, or Elfrid Payton and Draymond?
I'll play Elf and Draymond in a tournament. There's also going to be a little bit of overlay in the 500K on DraftKings. I'm looking at it right now, and it literally, and I don't mean just it won't fill. It's not going to fill. I think it's actually going to overlay a couple bucks. So their main $500,000 tournament with $12 entry, I don't think is going to quite get 500K in. So I think we'll actually slightly overlay, which is pretty rare these days. So I will yell that out.
All right. Take that as a lesson, DK. Drop those prices. Big $5 tournaments. Bring them back. Rank top Cavs if Lillard is out for a DK GPP.
DK top Cavs. I'm gonna go look at my ranks. I had a few of them very close there.
DSJ was just ruled out, so you are correct.
There we go. So that's yeah. Just with the whole trade thing, I think they would really need a real specific reason to do that. I will go on DK in GPPs with probably Hood, Burks, Sexton, Clarkson, Osman in that order. Assuming you're looking for sort of the middle guys. Doesn't change a lot on Tristan for me, but it would make me a little more confident in that play. Probably he would be after, in tournaments, he'd probably be on top or maybe after Hood, but I didn't count him in that listing because I'm just looking sort of their multitude of wings.
Let's see. Any other good questions in the premium Slack? Nothing good in the Slack right now, but if you have anything else, drop them in there. Derek White or Elfrid Payton?
Elfrid Payton in tournaments. I don't know. I think I would Derek White in cash. That would be really close in the environment the two of them are looking at. But in tournaments, I'll have Elfrid Payton.
What are your thoughts on Jalen Brunson now with Dennis Smith out?
He is a reasonable FanDuel punt. I don't think I want him anywhere else. I still just, again, not a tremendous fantasy basketball player. I kind of like the matchup for him, but again, I think your most likely outcome is 24 minutes and 18.5 fantasy points. So feel free, but very meh. Would much rather Shelvin Mack. Like, I just think Mack has a 25% chance of getting you 30 or something, and I think Jalen Brunson has a 10% chance of getting you 30. So I would just be more inclined towards the guy who can actually give me a serviceable upside number.
All right, let's see. Checking the Slack again. Nothing. Slack not coming through with either ors today. Thank you for not doing that. But Evan Turner and Mirotic or CJ McCollum and Curry, I presume, Steph.
I'll go with McCollum and Curry.
Right now. Must be Seth. Yeah, Seth.
I will still go with McCollum and Curry as of this writing, but that's a little more interesting.
Let's see. Going through the YouTube chat now. About 1 minute left, so get your stuff in. Doncic or DeRozan?
Doncic, cash, DeRozan in tournaments. Feel pretty strongly about that one too. Not that either of them are horrible in the other environment, but that just sort of feels like the place where it adds up to make the most sense for me.
That's fair. All right. Mac or Mills for cash?
Mac.
Gobert or Vucevic for DKGPP?
Gobert is the points per dollar just slightly better play, so I Gobert is better, but you're gonna get much better ownership on Vooch, so it's as you will. It depends what you're just sort of trying to do with your lineup. We are started, my friend.
We are locked. What is going on with Dennis Smith Jr.? Dennis Smith Jr. is also, there's some trade rumors. That's what's going on, but people are posting articles.
They will trade him, and he is a player who is fine right now, has a lot of an upside. They don't need him. I mean, in fantasy basketball, he is a guy, not even just fantasy, but just in real life basketball, he can draw enough value now, and there's a lot of teams that, if he shows up in Orlando or Phoenix, or there's just a lot of places in which he could be a really, really good fantasy basketball player, a really good basketball player, and he doesn't play that well alongside Doncic, and it's just better for everyone to get him out of there. So I don't know how he feels about it personally, but it makes, a lot of sense for him to get traded. So, all
right, do you want to pull up Daddy Likes and answer one question at the same time?
Yeah, I'll try.
Nixon wondering if he should feel bad about playing Tristan Thompson.
No, I'm fine with Tristan Thompson. I'm not overly concerned with the matchup. They'll actually, want him out there to just, be big for an extensive period of time. No, I'm fine with Tristan Thompson. It ends up being a little site dependent, but unsurprisingly, and they've gone back to this. There were a couple decent days of not having only shit at lock, but this is now something like 4 of the last 6 days where there's one game at lock and it's terrible. And here we go, number 1 owned guy, Evan Fournier, 15%.
Yeah, I got a good bit of Fournier today.
Yeah, that's fine. I would generally rather play Gordon. I'd rather play Augustine. So for those reasons, I'm a little disinclined towards it. Fournier is, so earlier in the year you had Fournier games where you repeatedly saw 25-30% usage. And when Aaron Gordon was suckling or what have you, you got those games again and you could run and bang it out. But if you look at his last, 8-10 games, all of them or close to all of them, he's got usage in the mid. He's at 17, 19, something like that. So you look at, he's coming off a couple decent games. I think he made over half his baskets in both those games. And,
you're correct.
Put up, about 30 fantasy points, which is fine. But just like the ceiling sort of has been whittled away, assuming they keep distributing minutes and usage the way they have. Where, like, those were the good games. Whereas earlier this year, where he admittedly cost $6K or something, you had he shot 15 for 24, as opposed to what you've seen the last couple of games, which, again, I believe is something like 8 out of 15, somewhere.
Yeah,
in
6 for 11 as well.
6 for 11, 8 out. Right, exactly. So I don't hate him, obviously, and sure that usage may come. The matchup isn't that exciting. Augustine, slightly better position, coming in at the 1, had a big game against Detroit earlier this year, so just for a number of reasons, I'd probably rather rock DJ there. Speaking of which, number 2, DJ Augustine, 10.5. Number 3, Reggie Jackson, 9.3. Daddy kind of dislikes that with Ishbak. He's just not getting it done. I didn't talk about Drummond. I like Drummond more than Griffin in this spot. There's a lot of ways in which this can go, and I don't love any of these guys at their prices on this slate, but if I had to play Vooch, Drummond, Blake, or Gordon, number 1 would be Gordon for me, and number 2 would be Blake for me. I think that's how those break down. So a couple hours, someone tweeted me if Gordon is, I'll say better than Vooch, not necessarily outscores him, but outscores Blake maybe, does well, and whether or not Drummond is the guy in the Pistons. Where were we? Aaron Gordon. Or I'm sorry, Vooch. Do that first. 9%. I'm fine with that at 9%. Is a fine Gobert pivot, for example. Aaron Gordon, 7%. Daddy obviously likes that quite a bit. Ish Smith, 5.14%. Meh. Cheap as hell, obviously. Probably gets 22 minutes again. The wing situation there is obviously legendarily messed up. And you want him to be good to play some time like next to Reggie, and they're basically shared in the last game, so not super excited, but again, wicked cheap on a slate with not a lot of great value. Reggie Bullock, 4.5, again at the price, meh. Andre Drummond, 4.1. I legit like that. I'd be happy with that. I'd want, closer to 10 for that value to be most actually realized with the ownership. Terrence Ross, 4%. Sure, again, the price has come up, so we're shaving away some of that value in not the best matchup, but certainly fine. Blake Griffin, 3.6. Sure. Jonathan Isaac, 2.7. Sure. Kem Birch with 1.5. I think Mo Bamba is currently doubtful, but that almost certainly will be fine because he probably won't play because he's doubtful. Kem Birch, 1.5. Luke Kennard, 0.81. Bruce Brown, 0.27. Stanley, 0.24. The faithful, still going. Langston Galloway, 0.15. Isaiah Briscoe, 0.14. Jonathan Simmons, 0.11. Is he back? I feel like he's out of the rotation almost, but that's not quite a you played yourself. Zaza Pachulia, 0.06. I think I saw Will play. He's been questionable, hurt, banged up a little. John Lure, 0.05. He's active. Kyrie Thomas, 0.02. Congratulations. You played yourself. He's inactive tonight.
There you go. All the poor Kyrie Thomas lovers out there suffering.
He's in
one last
three
question.
lineups. 0.02 is like multiple lineups because there were .aughts that registered. So it's at least
They must have
3.
confused their Kyries and thought, what a deal.
Wow, Kyrie for only, that's what happened. Yeah.
Napier, Curry, or Mac for Yahoo cash?
Mac for cash. Curry for tournaments probably. Napier's cute. If he's still priced at that point and he is going to play, I have some interest there. And again, I guess D'Angelo Russell is a little bit worse with Napier. Kyrie is active? Okay. I thought I saw a blurb from someone sent to me saying Kyrie Thomas was inactive.
Fantasy Lab said that he was out.
Okay, Fantasy Labs it was? Yeah, it's something on my streak. Kyrie Thomas inactive Wednesday. Fantasy Labs 40 minutes ago. So they have not yet rescinded that tweet if it is point of fact inaccurate. But just in case you're right, nobody else played themselves. So that could be the third time this year that no one played themselves.
And just to close the loop on the Dennis Smith Jr. thing, something that our guy K-Shep Killicam posted in the chat. Mavs coach Rick Carlisle says Dennis Smith Jr. is still sick and not available tonight. Smith tweeted this afternoon about meeting a fan while out for lunch. Carlisle declined to say whether he had talked to Smith.
Yeah. So, that's I generally tend to be really, really sympathetic to people in that situation. What are you going to... yes, we're getting rid of the guy. Clearly, we think we can do better without him and whatever he gets us than with him. And that's a really sticky. So I don't think anyone there dislikes. You know what I'm saying? It's just one of those things when it's going to be an awkward situation. It reminds me a little
bit of when Stan Van Gundy and Dwight Howard were talking shit about each other, and the other one was right over the shoulder.
Yeah,
it's sort of a similar thing where it's you can't get caught lying like that. That's basically the worst possible look.
Yeah, literally, I think it was a Van Gundy press conference where he had said fairly frank comments about I don't think Dwight wants me. I don't think it was when he was actually fired, but I think it was a press conference about something negative Dwight had said about him. And, like, in the middle of the press conference, Dwight comes up and does this really fake display of throwing his arm around him, being like, love Stan, Stan's my guy. And then he walks off and they go back to, so those comments that, you know, have leaked about how Dwight doesn't like you and wants you gone. And it's like, yeah, it was a good one. Solid.
One last question from Nixon. Thoughts on Bledsoe on DK tonight? And any other point guards at that price point who would be a better option to you?
No, I really like Eric Bledsoe. Should have brought him up. Loved him yesterday, and he was a monster in 22 minutes or whatever for his 35, 37 fantasy points or whatever. That game was a massive blowout, so everyone was very good in their limited time there. But he's played very well several games in a row, and this is another matchup where, of course, there's a Giannis upside. It's Giannis. He can randomly, especially if, you know, Marc Gasol isn't feeling 100% and Triple J gets in foul trouble pretty quick. It's like when I had that whole, you know, Andre Drummond's a bad play at 7,900 versus Gobert today unless something goes funny. Well, something went funny. Gobert got 2 fouls. Andre Drummond got 25 in the first quarter. That can happen. So this is not a good matchup for Giannis unless something goes funny, and that can be just, you know, some foul trouble plus Gasol not being 100% and he can get done what he gets done. But if you go back and look at, you know, this matchup, what you're going to see more often than not is you get 50 out of Giannis and 35 to 40 out of Middleton and Bledsoe. So FanDuel Middleton, the much more advantageously priced, and DK $6,300 Bledsoe. I legit like. I have him projected for 34 and change, I think, with a very real ceiling there. So yeah, I like Eric Bledsoe. Don't love him. Don't need to crush him in there, but wouldn't feel bad if I had him anywhere.
All right, so there we go. That's everything. Make sure you use that promo code live before lock to get 50% off for your first month at Osmo.com. Get Eddie's rankings when we figure out the tech part of that, which will be tomorrow. I'm confident we'll figure it out.
Our tech guy has been texting me during the show because I was like, I have literally put in this information. I'm presuming like my username is wrong. He's like, now go to this URL, put in this password, and it just does not open for the remote adding for me. I presume it is auto-detecting my incorrect Microsoft name, some shit like that. So it's just a setting I got to change, and we'll get there.
Well, there you go. The people will figure it out behind the scenes. So make sure to use that promo code live before lock to get 50% off your first month. Get Eddie's rankings, Josh's projections, as well as Awesomo's rankings and ownership projections, which we discuss ad nauseum throughout the show. Very important tools to help you win in DFS every day. Make sure to like the video as well before you leave. Eddie, any parting words before we go call it a day on this Wednesday?
No. Good luck, everyone. I may, in fact, be off tomorrow. There's a chance. I had planned to wait until Sunday because Sunday, this sort of trash all-day 3 games. I don't remember what it is, but it wasn't good. So I was like, you know, why don't I do a Thursday show? Because NBA's been very cool this week with, like, every day having 6 games. I think tomorrow's, like, 6 as well. I think, like, the main Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday this week was, like, 6-6, 8-6, which is pretty great for fantasy basketball. But I may actually be gone tomorrow. If that is the case, I will certainly be back Friday and Saturday. So
there you go. So if that is the case, then you'll have Josh and Eddie tomorrow. I'll be back with Eddie on Friday. So thank you guys for tuning in. We appreciate you, and good luck.